The chapel at Ashmore Park had not been opened since the winter of 1812, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Brent, said this with a firmness that discouraged further inquiry. She said it to the laundrywomen, she said it to the underfootman, and she said it in a particular lowered voice to Cook, who had no reason to ask but who had been at Ashmore Park long enough to notice that the housekeeper's firmness on any point usually concealed something heavier than convenience. Cook's name was Mara Fenwick. She was 26 years old, and she had been in service at Ashmore Park for 4 years, first as a kitchen maid, and then, after old Mr. Crouch retired to his sister's house in Bath, as cook in her own right. She was not precisely what the position advertised. She had been trained in her father's house, not in a great kitchen, and her father had been a man of modest property, a country solicitor who taught his daughters to read Latin as readily as they learned to make pastry, who had kept a library of 400 volumes in his study and had never once suggested that his daughters had any less right to it than he did. He had died 3 years before this story begins, leaving behind a debt Mara could not discharge on a solicitor's clerk's salary, and so she had come to Ashmore Park with a small trunk and a smaller pride, and had learned to be useful. She was useful. No one disputed it. The dining table at Ashmore Park had improved measurably since her appointment, the kitchen running with a quiet efficiency that the previous cook, with all his professional training, had never quite managed. Lord Ashmore himself had said nothing on the subject, which was his manner of saying everything. He noticed the food. He did not look at her. This was the state of things on the morning she went into the chapel. She had no intention of going into the chapel. The candles in the dining room had burned low during the previous night's dinner, and she had sent the kitchen boy, young Ned, to search the supply room on the far side of the courtyard. Ned had come back reporting that the supply room was locked and the key was not on its hook, and could he try the vestry of the old chapel where he had once seen candles stored in a wooden box. Mara had said no. Then she had thought of Lord Ashmore's face at dinner with the candles guttering into their sockets, and she had put on her outdoor wool and gone herself. The chapel was cold in the way that stone buildings remember cold, holding it past any reasonable season. It was late March, and the grounds outside were beginning to suggest spring, the first hedgerows showing green at their edges, and the kitchen garden starting to smell of turned earth in the mornings. But inside the chapel, the air was the air of January, and the light through the narrow windows was gray and still. The candles were where Ned had said, in a wooden box set into the alcove beside the vestry door. Mara lifted the lid and began counting tapers, her breath faint in the cold, her fingers leaving prints in the dust. She did not hear the floor give. She felt it. The stone beneath her left foot shifted fractionally, a small grinding sound that was not the sound of solid ground, and she stepped back instinctively and looked down. The flagstone was one of many, unmarked, laid in the same pattern as every other stone in the nave, but when she crouched and pressed at its edge, it moved. Not much. An inch, perhaps. Enough to show that whatever had once sealed it had not held. She should have left it. She knew she should have left it. The stone came up with her hands and the aid of a short iron poker she found resting against the vestry door. Beneath it was a cavity not much larger than a bread box, lined in oilcloth that had kept the damp out, and inside the oilcloth was a letter. She knew, even before she read the direction on the outside, that it had been there a long time. The paper had the particular quality of documents that have waited, neither yellowed nor fresh, simply patient. The seal was broken. Someone had read it once, and then had hidden it here rather than destroy it, which was a choice that said everything about the person who made it. The broken seal and the hidden place together described a man who had wanted to bury knowledge without quite becoming the man who destroyed it. She opened it. It took her 2 readings to understand what she held. Then she sat on the cold floor of the chapel, the oilcloth in her lap, and read it a 3rd time in the gray light from the high windows. And what she felt was not triumph or excitement, but something closer to the particular stillness that follows news one has not prepared to receive. The letter was dated the 23rd of November, 1801. It was addressed to Mr. Thomas Ashmore, who had been Lord Ashmore's father, and who had died 11 years ago. It was written by a solicitor in Bristol named Cadwell, and its subject was the legitimate issue of a Mr. Fenwick of Exeter, specifically one Mara, born the 12th of March, 1802, to the lawful wife of said Fenwick, née Clara Ashmore, youngest daughter of the Ashmore line, who had in her 18th year contracted a clandestine but entirely legal marriage before a vicar in Devonshire, whose parish record still stood, and who had died in childbed before the family had gathered itself to decide whether to acknowledge the match. She, the letter stated, was the blood granddaughter of the first Viscount Ashmore, and, as the surviving female line, held a claim to the property and income of Ashmore Park that was not without legal force, particularly given that the present Lord Ashmore's own inheritance ran through a collateral line and had been contested, briefly, at the time of his father's death. She read it a 4th time. Then she folded it exactly as it had been folded, placed it inside her apron pocket, replaced the stone, and went back to the kitchen to begin the luncheon. If you are still with her, in that cold chapel, still watching her press the stone back into its place with both palms, then you may already understand something the rest of Ashmore Park did not. What Mara did in the next 3 days was not reckless, was not impulsive, and was not in any way the act of a woman who had forgotten her position. It was the act of a woman who understood, precisely and without illusion, both what the letter was and what it would cost her to produce it. She told no one. She told no one because she was not yet certain the letter was what it appeared to be, and she was not willing to stake her place at Ashmore Park on a document she did not fully understand. Her father had been a solicitor. She knew better than most how many ways a legal claim could be valid in letter and inert in practice. She knew that the law that had been true in 1801 might have been altered, clarified, or superseded in the years since. She knew that a document found beneath a stone by a cook was not the same as a document presented by a solicitor in chambers. And she knew, with the particular clarity of a woman who has earned her own bread for 3 years, that she was not equipped to carry this letter into Lord Ashmore's study without understanding first what it actually said. So she cooked. She cooked Tuesday's dinner and Wednesday's breakfast and the Thursday luncheon that Lord Ashmore ate alone in the dining room, because his guests had departed and the house had gone quiet around him. She made a ragout that cost her more attention than it deserved, her hands doing the familiar work while her mind remained in the chapel, and she baked the Friday bread and prepared a sauce that Mrs. Brent described as the best she had tasted since the cook before old Mr. Crouch. Mara received the compliment with the expression of a woman whose attention was somewhere else. She read carefully, in the hours after the kitchen was cleaned, the legal texts her father had left her, and which she had carried in her trunk without quite knowing why. She had 4 of them. 2 general guides to English property law, 1 slim volume on the subject of equity and inheritance, and a set of handwritten notes her father had made over many years that she had bound in cloth and kept, because she could not make herself leave them behind. She went through all 4 across 5 evenings, sitting at the small table in her room with a single candle, reading until the candle was half gone, and her eyes ached. She wrote a letter of her own, brief and unrevealing, to a solicitor in Taunton named Mr. Clarence, who had worked occasionally with her father and who owed the Fenwick name, if not the Fenwick estate, a small degree of professional courtesy. She did not see Lord Ashmore except at a distance, in the way that servants and their employers occupy the same house without inhabiting the same world. He was 34 years old, the Earl of Ashmore, and his name was Edmund. His given name was used by almost no one at Ashmore Park, the upper staff having long settled into forms of address that kept the appropriate distance. He was tall in the manner of men who have always taken their height for granted, with dark hair that went unremarked because he wore it severely, and a face that the household described to one another, when they described it at all, as severe in the same way. He was not unkind. He was the kind of man whose attention, when it landed, felt like a change in the weather, and who had apparently decided some years ago that it was kinder not to let it land. Mrs. Brent said he had been different before his wife died. His wife had been a Miss Wentmore of Gloucestershire, dead 4 years now of a fever that had come in July and taken her in 10 days, and the house still felt her absence in certain rooms, particularly the morning room where her pianoforte stood with the lid down and the music still open on the stand to the last piece she had been learning. Nobody touched it. Nobody suggested touching it. The morning room had taken on the particular quality of a room that holds its breath. Mara had seen him pause in the doorway of the morning room once, in the early weeks of her employment, when he did not know anyone was in the corridor. She had been passing with an armful of linen for the upper landing, and she had turned the corner and stopped just short of the doorway, and she had seen him standing there, perfectly still, looking at something inside the room that she could not see from her angle. He had stood there for perhaps 3 seconds. Then he had closed the door and walked away. And she had waited until his footsteps were gone before she moved, and she had thought about that 3 seconds for longer than she could account for. The letter from Mr. Clarence in Taunton arrived on a Saturday. It was brief, and it was careful, and it said, in the considered language of a man who had spent 30 years weighing his words before writing them down, that the claim described in Mara's letter appeared to him to have considerable substance, that the Devonshire parish record she mentioned would be determinative if it could be produced, that a surviving document from the family's own solicitor acknowledging the birth would strengthen the case materially, and that she should on no account present any of this herself to anyone without proper representation. He also said, and this was the line she read 4 times, that the claim as she described it would not displace Lord Ashmore from the earldom, which was a separate matter of peerage succession, but that it would give her a substantial equitable interest in the property and income of Ashmore Park, and that any court of equity in England would be obliged to consider it. She sat with this information for 2 more days. She was not sitting idle. She was deciding something, which for her had always required the same stillness that other people mistook for passivity. Her father had called it her best quality and her worst habit in the same breath. She was deciding what kind of person she intended to be. She could present the letter to a solicitor of her own and pursue the claim through the courts. This would take years and cost money she did not have, and would require her to leave Ashmore Park and the income it provided while the matter was pending. It would also require her to accuse Lord Ashmore of nothing, because he had done nothing. His father had hidden the letter, not him, and whatever Thomas Ashmore's motives had been in concealing it, they were a dead man's reasons now and could answer for themselves. She could destroy the letter and go back to her kitchen and never think of it again. Or she could give the letter to Lord Ashmore himself and let him decide. She chose the third. She chose it not because it was prudent, which it was not, and not because she trusted him specifically, because she had no particular evidence that he deserved trust. She chose it because it was the honest thing, and because her father had taught her that honesty was not a strategy, but a discipline, and because she could not go on cooking his dinners and sleeping under his roof while holding a document of this consequence in her apron pocket. The weight of it was beginning to affect her sleep in a way she could not quite suppress, the letter present in her awareness, even when she was not thinking of it. The way a stone in the shoe makes itself felt in every step, even when attention is elsewhere. She went to the study on a Monday afternoon. At the hour she knew he was there from the pattern of the household's movements, and she knocked. He did not look up immediately when she entered. He was reading something at his desk, and he finished the line before he raised his head, which was his manner with everyone, and which she had observed enough times from the far end of the dining room to recognize. Then he looked at her with the expression of a man who has found something unexpected in a familiar room, and waited. "I have something to show you, my lord," Mara said. Her voice was steady, which she had counted on it to be. "I found it in the chapel, beneath a stone in the nave. I believe it concerns your family, and I think you should read it. Before I say anything else," she set the letter on his desk, still in its oilcloth wrapping, and stepped back. He looked at the wrapping for a moment without touching it. Then he looked at her again, and there was something in the quality of that look that she found difficult to name. It was not suspicion. It was something more like attention, the kind that costs something to give. He opened the letter. She watched his face as he read. It was a controlled face, practiced at neutrality, but the letter was 4 pages long, and by the second page the control had acquired a quality of effort that had not been there at the start. By the third page, something in the set of his jaw had altered in a way she thought he would not have permitted if he had been aware it was happening. He read all 4 pages. He read them again. He set the letter down on his desk and looked at it for a long moment. "Where did you find this?" he said. It was not quite a question. She told him. She told him about the loose stone and the oilcloth and the wooden box of candles she had gone to retrieve, and the kitchen boy Ned's prior knowledge of where the candles were stored. She told him all of it plainly and without embellishment, and he listened in the way that he had apparently decided to listen to things, which was completely and without interruption. "How long have you had it?" he said. 10 days, she said. "I wrote to a solicitor in Taunton before I brought it to you. A Mr. Clarence, who knew my father. I wanted to understand what I was holding before I produced it." Something shifted in his expression. Not softness precisely. Something more like a reassessment. The look of a man revising an assumption he had not known he was making. "You are the daughter of a solicitor," he said. "He died 3 years ago. There was a debt." "I know," Edmund said, which was not what she expected him to say. She must have shown it because he continued. "I knew your father's name when Mrs. Brent hired you. My father had once mentioned a Fenwick of Exeter in connection with a matter I did not pursue. I did not connect it to this because I did not know this matter existed. My father died without speaking of it." There was a silence. It was the particular silence of a room in which something large has settled. "What do you intend to do?" he said. And the question was asked without hostility, with the same attention he had given the letter. "I do not know," Mara said, which was honest. "That rather depends on you." He looked at her steadily for a moment. "On me. You have resources I do not have. You could suppress this or challenge it in court. My solicitor tells me the claim has substance, but substance and success in court are different things, and I cannot fund a suit of this kind. I am telling you this because I think you should know I understand that." She folded her hands. "I am also telling you because I would not have this over me in silence. I would rather you know than live in this house with it hidden between us." He stood up. He was taller when standing than she ordinarily considered him from the corridor, which was an observation that served no practical purpose, but arrived unbidden. He moved to the window and looked out at the grounds for what felt like a long time. The parkland was showing its first green. A pair of rooks crossed the gray sky beyond the glass. "My father," he said, still facing the glass, "was not a cruel man. I have been trying to arrive at that conclusion for most of the last 11 years, with varying success. He was a man who valued order above most things, and who believed that the order of a household and an estate was itself a kind of good, and that disruptions to it were a kind of harm. I think he looked at this letter and saw a disruption, and hid it." Mara said nothing. She was not certain anything was required. "He was wrong," Edmund said. "That is not a judgment I make lightly." He went back to his desk. He picked up the letter and looked at it again, though she had the sense he was no longer reading it, but rather holding it as something that had been waiting a long time and had now arrived. "I will write to my solicitor in London this afternoon," he said. "I will ask him to begin the process of establishing the claim properly. It will take some time. While it is pending, you will continue in your current position, because to remove you would create the appearance of suppression, and because, frankly, the kitchen has not been run this well since my mother's time." He set the letter down. "If the claim is established, we will discuss the practical arrangements then. I am not in a position to promise you anything more specific than that at present." "I am not asking for promises," Mara said. "I know," he said. "That is precisely why I am making one." She left the study in the particular state of a person who has said an irrevocable thing and cannot yet determine whether they will be glad of it. The weeks that followed had the quality of a held breath, which was not entirely comfortable, but was at least familiar. The household continued. The kitchen continued. Mara made the Tuesday suppers and the Thursday luncheons, and the particular lemon tarts that Mrs. Brent favored on Fridays. And she did not speak of the letter to anyone, and no one spoke of it to her. Lord Ashmore had evidently said nothing to the upper staff, and if he had said anything to his London solicitor beyond what he described, the solicitor was keeping it appropriately silent. She saw Lord Ashmore at the distance that their positions required, which was the same distance she had always seen him at, and yet the distance had acquired a quality it had not previously possessed. She was aware of it in the way one is aware of a door that has been opened slightly, changing the air in a room without quite allowing passage. Some mornings she would pass the study door, and the awareness would land on her skin like a change in temperature. He had taken to pausing in the kitchen doorway on Thursday evenings. She noticed it first on the second Thursday after her visit to the study. She was finishing the preparation for Friday's breakfast, the kitchen around her clean and quiet, and she turned to find him standing at the door with an expression that suggested he had not planned to be there. He said something about needing to speak with Mrs. Brent. Mrs. Brent was not in the kitchen. He stood for a moment looking at the shelves, then left. The following Thursday he paused in the doorway again, this time with a cup of something that Ned had evidently brought him from the kitchen, and he looked at the shelves she had reorganized in October and said, "The kitchen is efficiently arranged. Thank you, my lord. My wife had opinions about kitchen arrangement," he said, in the tone of a man discovering, mid-sentence, that he has said something he did not intend to say. He stopped. She kept her hands at the pastry she was working. She did not look up. Was she very particular about it? She was particular about most things. She found inefficiency distressing. He looked at a point slightly above her head. She would have approved of this, I think. He left again. She did not look up until his footsteps had faded. She thought about this for some time afterward, in the way one turns an unexpected gift over in one's hands, to determine what it is. Not the words themselves, which were harmless, but the fact of his saying them. The choosing of her kitchen doorway to say them in. The quality of a man who does not speak of his dead wife to anyone but who had said her name in this room on this particular evening. The solicitor's letter arrived in early May. It was addressed to Lord Ashmore, and she did not know its contents until he sent for her on a Thursday afternoon, which was becoming something of a pattern. She was shown to the library this time rather than the study, and she came in to find him standing at the window again, the afternoon light behind him, which also seemed to be a pattern. "The parish record exists," he said, "in Devonshire, as described. The vicar who performed the ceremony made a full entry, and the record has not been disturbed. My solicitor is of the opinion that your claim to a substantial interest in Ashmore Park is sound, and would be upheld in equity." He turned. "He is also of the opinion, expressed with some delicacy, that the simplest resolution would be the most expedient." Mara waited. "He suggests a marriage," Edmund said. He said it in the way he said most things, which was levelly and with some attention to the words he was choosing. "Between you and me. As the mechanism by which the property and the claim and the question of the estate's future could be settled in a manner satisfactory to the law and practical for everyone involved." The library was very quiet. Outside, a wood pigeon was conducting some inquiry in the beech tree by the stable wall. The afternoon lay across the room in long, shallow light. "Your solicitor suggests this," Mara said. "He does. And you?" A pause. He looked at her in the way she had come to recognize, which was the look of a man who has decided to say a true thing. "I am suggesting it as well, for reasons that are not entirely legal, though the legal reasons are real, and I will not pretend otherwise." He moved from the window. He did not come closer, but he moved. Which, in the language this particular man spoke, was a kind of approach. "I have watched you for 4 years, Miss Fenwick. I have watched you without entirely understanding why I was watching. I notice what you do, and I notice how you do it, and I have spent a considerable amount of time arriving at the conclusion that the reason I notice is that I am a man who has been very quiet for a long time, and your presence in this house is not quiet. Even when you are being entirely silent, you are not quiet." Mara said, "I am not certain that is a compliment." "It is not a compliment," he said. "It is an observation. The compliment is this. You brought that letter to me when you had no practical obligation to do so. You could have pursued the claim through the courts, and I would not have been able to stop you. You chose honesty instead of strategy. And the choice cost you something, because you knew it gave me information I could use against you. I am not the sort of man who forgets a choice like that." She looked at him steadily. The situation was not what she had imagined, which was itself interesting, because she had spent considerable time imagining it, and not once had she imagined it like this. She had imagined documents and courts and solicitors and the cold arithmetic of legal proceedings. She had not imagined this afternoon room with its warm light and its quiet wood pigeon and the space between herself and this man that felt like it had been measured by someone careful. "I am a cook," she said. "You are my blood cousin and the heir to a substantial equitable claim on this estate," he said. "That is also true." "Those things are not incompatible with one another," she said. "No," he said. "They are not." He looked at her carefully. "I am not asking you to decide today. I am asking you to consider it. I am also asking you, if you are willing, to take tea with me in the morning room tomorrow, because I have realized that the practice of speaking to you only in my study and the library is beginning to feel artificial, and I would rather speak to you in a room that does not carry the specific weight of formal proceedings." She was quiet for a moment. "The morning room?" she said. "With the pianoforte?" He was quiet too. "Yes." "All right," Mara said. She thought, walking back to the kitchen, that she had not said yes to the marriage, and he had not asked her again to say yes, and yet the conversation had somehow contained both question and answer within it. The way that certain things are decided not by the moment of speaking, but by all the moments that preceded it, and which had no other reasonable conclusion. She thought her father, who had taught her that the most consequential agreements were often never spoken aloud, but simply arrived at, would have found this unsurprising. The morning room, when she entered it the next day in her second-best dress with her hair done properly rather than beneath a kitchen cap, smelled of beeswax and the particular dusty warmth of a room long shut. He was already there. He had opened the curtains. The light came in over the pianoforte and fell across the open music. Still on the stand. Still on the last piece his wife had been learning, and he looked at it with an expression she had seen once before in the corridor, but which she could now observe directly. It was not grief precisely, or not grief only. It was the expression of a man who has learned to carry a specific weight, and carries it well, and does not put it down, even in private. He said, not to her, but to the room, "She liked you. She would have liked you, I mean. She had no patience for deception, and she could not abide waste. She would have said it was wasteful, keeping you in the kitchen when you were who you were." "She sounds formidable," Mara said. "She was," he said. "I failed her in one particular that I will not specify, and I have spent 4 years failing to arrive at a conclusion about what to do with that. I am telling you this because I think you should know it exists, and because I also think you are equipped to hear it, without mistaking it for the whole of me." She sat down across from him at the small table where the tea had been laid. The cup she picked up was good porcelain, finer than anything she had handled in the kitchen. She looked at him in the clear morning light, which was less forgiving than candlelight and considerably more useful for the purposes of seeing a person as they actually were. "We are both people who carry things alone," she said. "You carried your grief, and I carried the letter, and neither of us said a word to anyone until we had to." She poured the tea. "That seems like either a good basis for a partnership or a very poor one, and I am not certain which." He looked at her with something that was not quite a smile, but that occupied the territory adjacent to one. The particular expression of a man who has not been surprised in a long time, and finds the sensation unexpectedly welcome. "I think it is a good basis," he said, "for two people who are both better at doing than declaring." That, it turned out, was the closest to a proposal either of them managed. The summer was warm, and the estate was busy with the particular business of a household reorganizing itself around a new fact. The staff, once Mrs. Brent was informed, received the news with a range of responses, of which the most common was a significant silence, followed by the expression of people who are recalculating everything they thought they knew. Ned, who was 12 and not yet skilled at concealment, said, "I knew something was different about her," with the conviction of a boy who had not known any such thing. Mrs. Brent, who had known for 4 years that she was not precisely what the position advertised, said only, "Yes," with the compressed weight of a woman who had been waiting for something to be confirmed and had the discipline not to say, "I told you so." Then she went to reorganize the linen closet for the 3rd time that quarter. The Taunton solicitor, Mr. Clarence, made the journey to Ashmore Park in August, and sat with Lord Ashmore's London solicitor for a full day in the study over documents that Mara was not asked to attend, because the men of both parties agreed, without discussing it with her, that her presence would be superfluous. She spent the day in the kitchen, out of a habit that was harder to break than she had anticipated, making the Friday tarts for Mrs. Brent, and thinking about the distance between a person's legal circumstances and their understanding of themselves, and how slowly one catches up to the other. The kitchen was familiar around her. The copper pots in their ranked order, the clean boards, the smell of pastry browning in the range. She had learned this room in the same way she had learned most things, by doing. And it was strange to stand in it knowing it was the last time she would stand in it as its primary authority. She was not sorry. She was, she thought, something more complicated than sorry or glad. She was in the condition of a person stepping from one solid surface to another across a small gap, and she had not yet landed. It was Edmund who came to find her when the meeting was finished. He stood in the kitchen doorway, where he had been standing on Thursday evenings for 3 months now, and he said, "It is settled." And she said, "Yes." And they looked at each other across the kitchen that would no longer precisely be hers to run, and neither of them looked away. They were married in September, quietly, in the chapel at Ashmore Park. The same chapel where the loose stone still sat in the nave. The oilcloth cavity empty now. The flagstone fitted back into its place with its small, grinding resistance. Mara had put fresh candles in the vestry box before the ceremony, because she was who she was, and some habits were not worth breaking, and there was no practical reason for the thing that had begun there to end there in darkness. The light through the high windows was the gold of early autumn, not the gray of that first morning, and the air was still cool in the way that stone buildings hold cold. But it was bearable now, with the doors propped open and the warmth of the season coming in from outside, and the few witnesses gathered in the pews, releasing the particular warmth of people assembled for a purposeful thing. She wore a gown that was neither her best nor her second best, but a new one, cream-colored, borrowed from no one. He wore dark blue, as he always wore, and he waited for her at the front of the chapel, with his hands folded and his face in the expression she had come to recognize as the one that preceded something true, the expression of a man setting down the careful distance he had maintained for years and standing without it. The vicar was an elderly man from the village who had known the Ashmore family for 40 years and who said the words of the ceremony with the measured gravity of a man who understood that words, once said aloud before witnesses, become a different kind of thing than words merely intended. He said them clearly, in the still gold air, and they landed as he had intended. Edmund took her hand when the ceremony required it, and he held it with a firmness that was not ceremony and did not let go when the particular moment had passed. Her hand in his, through both layers of their gloves, was a warmth that arrived before thought had time to comment on it. Afterward, the household gathered in the dining room for a modest celebration, and the table was set the way Mara had always set it, because she had been asked to plan it, and she had planned it as herself, not as the person she was in the process of becoming. There were the lemon tarts. There was a proper roast. There were candles in every holder, burning straight and steady in the September evening, replacing no one. Mrs. Brent cried, briefly, into her handkerchief, in the manner of women who have been right about something for a long time and find the confirmation arrives with an emotion they did not quite anticipate. Ned ate 3 of the tarts and was not corrected, because Mara did not correct him. She noticed him and did not correct him, which had been, she thought, her method with Ned since the beginning. Lord and Lady Ashmore sat at the head and foot of a table shortened for the occasion, and now gathered into something that felt less like a dining room and more like a room where people were comfortable, which was not the usual character of Ashmore Park's dining room. And Mara thought her father would have liked the specificity of that distinction. Late in the evening, when the guests had gone to their rooms and the kitchen was clean and quiet, Mara stood at the window of the morning room with a cup of tea that had gone cold, looking out at the grounds in the early dark of September. The last rooks were crossing the darkening sky. The parkland was still in the way that September parkland is still, a different stillness from January's stillness, warm at its edges even where the shadows had gathered. The music was still on the pianoforte stand. She thought she would leave it there. Not as a refusal to move forward, and not because she did not dare to touch it, but because some things are not meant to be tidied away, and the piece his wife had been learning was part of the house's account of itself, and the house deserved to keep it. Edmund came to stand beside her. He did not say anything. This was one of the things she had learned about him, that his silences were not empty, but occupied, inhabited by the consideration he gave to everything, and that standing in them alongside him was its own kind of conversation. She had been alone for long enough to know the difference between solitude and loneliness, and to know that what she was standing in now was neither. His hand found hers at her side, not the formal holding of the ceremony, but something quieter and more habitual, as though the gesture had been practiced somewhere neither of them had access to, and was now only arriving at its occasion. Her hand turned and held back. She thought of her father. She thought of the small trunk she had brought to Ashmore Park 4 years ago, the legal texts packed alongside the worn winter dress, the small miniature of her mother tucked in the corner in its oval frame. She thought of the cold morning in the chapel, and the stone she had not meant to test, and the letter she had not meant to find, and the folded oilcloth and the broken seal, and the patience of a document that had waited 25 years for a foot to find it. She thought that the most consequential things rarely arrive announced. They arrive beneath the floor, folded in oilcloth, waiting for the right foot to find them. And when they do, the question is only what you are willing to do with what you find. He reached across with his free hand and took the cold cup from her and set it on the side table without a word. And she let him, and the room held both of them in the quiet autumn dark. The pianoforte and the music and the single candle still burning on the mantel gave their light to the room. The wood pigeon that had kept its inquiry in the beech tree all afternoon had finally resolved whatever the matter was and gone to roost, and the evening was entirely still. She had not said the plain, small word yet. Not aloud, though she had been aware of it for some time. The way one is aware of a door that has always been there, but which one has not yet had occasion to open. She would say it tomorrow. She was certain of it. The candle held its small flame in the still air. The stone in the chapel sat in its old place in the nave, empty now, no longer keeping anything for anyone. Mara Fenwick Ashmore stood at the window of the morning room in the house that had always been hers, and held her husband's hand in the dark, and did not say the word yet because she had all the time she needed.